Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, November 22nd, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
The Trump transition is not working the way anybody would have thought the Trump transition was going to go, by which I mean that the appointment of Matt Gaetz was withdrawn by Matt Gaetz 8 days into Matt Gaetz's tenure as an appointee to the to be nominated to be the Attorney General of the United States, and then 3 hours later, his successor as nominee, Pam Bondi, was named. And we talk about all what happened there. But Matt has been making this point, I think, since the cabinet names and other names first started surfacing, that this is not only a completely different political approach for Trump, which is to say that it's the opposite of chaotic, even though the nominations may be startling and often sort of breathtaking, not necessarily in a good way, but it is relentless. It is. It may not be organized, but what we're going to get is that by December 1st, all of the major appointments are going to be announced and ready to be on the runway. And Trump clearly knows what he wants and knew what he wanted right after Matt Gaetz was going to go. And apparently he told Matt Gaetz to go yesterday morning. It was not Gaetz's own decision. So this gives us clues and hints to the seriousness, I think, with which we should take the incoming administration. It's not going to be, Omarosa's coming in, should we give her a desk over there? And anyone can walk into Trump's office and nobody has any say over his schedule. And something else very significant is going on.
Can I put on my John Podhoretz hat and make a pop culture reference and use it to explain politics? Because as you're describing this,
it's not The Odd Couple, then you can't.
It's not The Odd Couple,
but
before
1950.
It's one of my favorite movies, little known but underappreciated, called Noises Off, which is based on a Broadway play, and it's about the backstage shenanigans to a show that's going on, a theatrical production. And what strikes me is, in the first Trump term, all the chaos was in front of the House. It was all on the stage, in front of the curtain. People were watching it. Whereas what happens now, and I think we saw this during the Trump campaign in 2024 as well, there's still chaos. There's still a lot of improvisation, a lot of impulsive decision-making, but it happens behind the stage, backstage. It happens behind the scenes. And I think the Gaetz pick was an example of this, something that happened very quickly, spur of the moment, on Trump Force One, not Air Force One yet, and you throw it out there, and it is one of the fastest retractions of a cabinet appointment in American history. And immediately you have a new nominee within a few hours, Pam Bondi. Now, what's interesting about Pam Bondi is she's also from Florida, but she's been around in Florida for a lot longer than Matt Gaetz. And I have a test that I'm applying to some of these cabinet choices, and I'm going to call it the Jeb Bush test. And if Jeb Bush tweets in approval of a nominee, as he has done to many of the nominees that Trump has put forward, they are almost certain to pass muster with the Senate. And sure enough, Jeb Bush congratulated Pam Bondi, who is, I think, was first elected AG of Florida right after Jeb left the governor's office, but clearly someone that Bush knows well in Florida politics. And so I think here we have the person that in all likelihood was probably Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles' first pick for Attorney General. And now she's getting the nod as the second pick for Attorney General.
Democrats do not have a leg to stand on to oppose Pam Bondi's appointment as Attorney General, with the exception of the fact that she was an election denier in 2020, or like was somebody who was arguing the case that the vote was stolen in Pennsylvania and stuff like that. But I just want to remind you that the early sign of the chaos in the Clinton administration. Now I'm going back 31 years here. Was that they had terrible trouble filling the attorney general slot, the first choice. Zoe Baird had to withdraw because she had an undocumented immigrant. She wasn't paying her nanny's taxes. Then the second choice, Kimba Wood, who was a federal judge in New York, it turned out that she had been a Playboy bunny, which apparently at the time
So tame these days, where everyone's an OnlyFans
disqualifying.
star. Yeah.
And then they hit on Janet Reno, a person with very limited qualifications for the office, because what she was
Also
the
from
state,
Florida.
From Florida, the state attorney for Miami-Dade County. Not even a statewide official. She was a local. This would be like appointing Alvin Bragg to the Cornel West cabinet as attorney general or something like that. But it was the third choice. She sailed through, and she served 8 years. She was a terrible attorney general, but and was responsible for decisions so catastrophic that they sort of led to the creation of the entire right-wing paranoid worldview,
The turn against the Justice Department, right?
Right, because of Ruby Ridge and Waco and the decision.
She did inspire one of the greatest SNL skits, however, which was Janet Reno's Dance Party, where Will Ferrell played Janet Reno.
Yeah, so we thank her for that. But I'm just saying that in the annals of we need a more experienced person for Attorney General. The Democratic Party and its and the person who took back the presidency for the Democratic Party for the first time in 2 decades did have an Attorney General with fewer qualifications than Pam Bondi, who was, after all, the Attorney General of the state of Florida for, I think, 8 years. Again, I'm not happy that she is an election denier, but the president himself is an election denier, and that does not seem to have been disqualified him before the American people.
She won his trust, it sounds, mostly because she helped him during the first impeachment proceedings. This is where I think it sounds like they became close. And she is a true Floridian. She graduated, I think, from University of Florida and then Stetson University Law School. She's a practicing attorney. She knows how to prosecute. She has the legal experience that Matt Gaetz clearly did not have. She also has her demeanor is really interesting to me. I mean, she doesn't kind of play. She's very blonde, and people are calling it legally Blondie and Bondi and all this stuff, and that's hilarious. But she's clearly quite tough. I mean, she's been tough in her campaigns. She's well regarded among in the private practice she went to recently, and she clearly also really walked a fine line on the election denial stuff, because she is not under indictment or has not been disbarred like many of the people.
That is an excellent point. That is an excellent point, because she's not Rudy Giuliani. Trump was allowed to make cases in courtrooms, as anybody is, even if they were crappy cases. And as I say, I don't think that we're in a position now to say that people who held this view can be denied office when 78 million Americans decided that holding this opinion was not sufficient to deny somebody.
I think the experience is crucial here. I mean, one of the many reasons that the Matt Gaetz pick struck Republican senators and others as kind of mind-boggling was he had never practiced as an attorney. He had gone to
2 years.
2 years. I'm sorry, 2 years. And so you look at, compared to Gaetz, Pam Bondi looks like, Judge Learned Hand, like a legal mind who will be recognized in the annals of history, So I think that helps her a lot. I mean, she's got a resume. People can look at what she's done as a prosecutor, as an attorney. And yes, the 2020 stuff will come up on the Democratic side, but I think Republicans won't have any problem
Do you
And
think
they've
that we
lost
would
some of
cite?
their
Do you think we
swing.
would cite Learned Hand if his name hadn't been Learned Hand? Wouldn't we have
No.
another? It's
He
Leonard
just
did write a
Block.
book on the
so perfect.
Constitution that
But
I hear is
it's
pretty
also
good. But
they
I
will
know,
if
but
they try to
still,
if they try to bring up election denial during her confirmation. I mean, there's a pretty Mark Elias and Casey. That what's going on in Pennsylvania should certainly be at least one response rhetorically to
right.
that argument.
yeah. What if Kamala had won and had named Stacey Abrams Attorney General?
Right.
Stacey Abrams, who sort of initiated the era
Yeah.
of the large
And
scale election
remains an
denial.
election denier. Yes.
I think election denial, I mean, has been adjudicated, not in the sense that, not in the same. I'm not referring to the results of the election itself. I mean, the political utility of attacking it. I think it's kind of a dead letter now.
And
right?
it's also a dead letter. It's also a dead letter because the two people who have gone down this road in 2024, one of them being Carrie Lake, who lost a race by 5 points, so therefore looks as more psychotic than she may even be, and I think that's probably base kind of psychotic, for seeming to claim that you can lose an election by 5 points and have it stolen, and Bob Casey, as you mentioned, the senator from Pennsylvania, was running for his fifth term, as I think fourth or fifth term as senator, lost the race. Every person who did those kind of mathematical tallies of what the outstanding vote that had yet to be counted among provisional ballots, that it would have had to have broken 90-10 in his favor for him even to approach parity with Dave McCormick, and nonetheless insisted on a statewide recount that he could have said, nah, don't do that.
He was running for his fourth term.
Fourth term, I'm
it's
sorry.
interesting. He was elected in 2006, defeating Rick Santorum, and also elected in that 2006 class was Tester and Sherrod Brown. So those 2006 Democrats have been kind of cycled out, all at once.
Anyway, so and it's important, I think, that Christine, you mentioned Mark Elias. So Mark Elias is a very effective, very cagey, canny lawyer whose business it is to do election law. There are people like this on the Republican side. Ben Ginsburg famously was the guy you turn to in a close election on the Republican side to help you figure out what was and was not possible. But Elias has become a grifter, and meaning that he basically is there to seek out credulous people who cannot cope with the fact emotionally that they lost an election they wish to have won, and clearly gulled Casey into believing that there was a strategy for him to take this back based on Elias's own very complicated experience with the Al Gore Norm Coleman race in Minnesota, which we can go into or not. I mean, that's a very problematic case in which the entire race was decided on 350 ballots that were found in the trunk of a car 6 months after the election. And Coleman basically said, "Oh, the hell with it now. I'm not going to go on with this," and did not insist on continuing the litigation, which could easily have continued. But Elias gulled Casey into 2 weeks of, I assume, highly compensated, very well billed, fighting that had no hope or prayer of success. And these two things together, combined with the fact that Trump didn't have to start making this argument about, the election being stolen from him anywhere, maybe we're going to move off this now. There has been no successful prosecution of my votes were stolen that has flipped the results of the election, with the exception of the Frank and Coleman race, which was 16 years ago.
2008, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And while I think talk about what it did for Trump, and I think it did some things for Trump that we haven't quite factored in. It would be really nice if this stopped. It's not helpful. Creates lingering bad taste, bad memories. It confirms or like advances the paranoia of people. What do you guys think?
Well, I agree. I mean, it's not helpful to the legitimacy of our elections, and this is a striking moment. I mean, Harry Enton, our friend at CNN, points out that this is really the kind of, with the exception of the two Obama elections, but even then, the first Obama election kind of gave birth to the birther smear, right? To the idea that Obama's not a legitimate president, or was not a legitimate president because he was born outside the United States, a conspiracy theory that was, of course, propagated by former and future President Trump. So really, I mean, 2024 seems to be the least kind of contested presidential election this century in the view of Harry Enton. I mean, because you think about 2000, right? That was the Florida fiasco. 2004 really inaugurated the idea that presidential elections were somehow illegitimate because of conspiracy theories. That was the whole Diebold conspiracy theory out of Ohio, embraced by the left in order to show that somehow Bush cheated. Also, in that cycle was the strange kind of lump on Bush's back during one of the debates, and the left was saying that Bush was getting, information messages from Dick Cheney or something. So that was 04. 08 and 12, that's Obama, right? 16 was Russian collusion, Russia.
Cambridge Analytica.
Yep. And 2020, Trump, it was Stop the Steal. So here, finally, a quarter of a century in to the 21st century, we have an election where pretty much everybody agrees Trump won. He won by over 2 million votes. His total seems to have drifted slightly below 50% of the total now, but if you round up, it's 50%, 48 for Trump. And that's, I think, a good moment to kind of turn the page and enter another political era.
But there are these two conceits that the last several elections have had because they were close, because they were so close. Obviously, the election was stolen is one, but I have a mandate once I've won is the other conceit that both sides have certainly Biden overplayed. And, there are some signs that Trump's second term, they could make the same mistake. This was still quite a close election. It was not a landslide. And the rhetoric coming out of the right now, very happy that they won is what they're expressing, but they're also a little overconfident about what the American people actually told them they want.
I think the mistrust of election results has been supplanted by more obvious semi-cons hoaxes to actually mistrust this election cycle, in part, I think is what has happened.
You mean the switcheroo? Biden's infirmities.
The cover-up on Biden's infirmities, and how the switcheroo happened, and how the media colluded with the White House on this. That, I think, has sort of taken up the paranoia oxygen, right?
Yeah, except it's true.
Right. Well, that's my point. Right.
Well, right. So it's not right. It's not paranoid if it's true. And so when you have something that's legitimately true, it's a comfort zone to people who maybe they really like the wheels within wheels and the conspiracies within conspiracies because that's more fun and it's more like 24. Or it's more like a Homeland or a television show about this. But I do have to say, the Democrats supplied a lot of fodder that was legitimate, and particularly in the wake of the election results, when the question is, what did they get for it? What did they actually get? Now, I think that the case has to be made that the switcheroo was necessary, and there's one key piece of data to suggest that this is the case, which is that there are these maps. They're pretty staggering, right? They show the country shifting 6 points to the right in aggregate nationwide, but not in the swing states, where the swing right was like 2.5%. And so the Democrats contested, Harris and the Democrats fought in the swing states, and they did a pretty good job in the sense that what happened in the rest of the country didn't happen in the same way in the swing states. Where they were fighting, they limited Trump's gains to a measurable but not overwhelming number. Had that not happened, and the swing states had followed the pattern of the rest of the country, it wouldn't have been an electoral college wipeout, but certainly those Senate seats probably would have
there'd be more Republican senators.
There'd be more Republican senators, and Trump would have won by 7 to 10 million votes as opposed to the 2 million votes that he won by.
I still think, though, we need to recognize just how bad a candidate Kamala Harris is. And my latest evidence for this proposition is an email that arrived in my inbox and maybe yours yesterday afternoon from the Harris-Walsh campaign asking for money on November 21st. And it's a reminder that Kamala Harris raised $1.5 billion for a campaign that was 2.5 months long, right? Or what,
3.5 months.
3.5 months long, right? 100 days, over 100 days, 3.5 months long. And she ended the campaign $20 million in debt. So much so that she has to kind of send out the mass emails in a desperate move to get small dollar donations. What small dollar donor would give money to reimburse the Harris campaign after we're still digging through the detritus and seeing that she was paying people for interviews? That's never happened in American politics. She was paying Oprah, the Reverend Al, the Call Your Daddy people. She was paying them for the interview. There's actually kind of a scandal here with Kamala Harris's spending that I don't think has been recognized or treated. So yes, Biden probably would have done worse than Harris, all told. But in some ways, even Biden, who is struggling, I mean, he was struggling at the White House yesterday when he greeted the Boston Celtics. He may have actually been a slightly better candidate, even in his dilapidated state, than Harris ended up being.
Well, I think that's an arguable. I mean, obviously, you can't run it again. It's all counterfactual. But you bring up something that I think is very interesting about the media going forward, which is, $1.5 billion was raised in an amount of time. No one has ever. There's never been anything remotely comparable to the fundraising juggernaut that this campaign that hadn't existed 4 days earlier had created. Where did that money go? A lot of it was stolen. A lot of it was grifted. There are vendors. There are going to be invisible vendors. The reports to the FEC and stuff like that, it takes a long time for those to go through. People don't really send them in, or they delay sending them, stuff like that. Is this something that the New York Times, which spent 2.5 years desperately trying to get Trump's tax records and got them in violation of every understanding of the personal privacy of an American citizen that was violated in that effort that apparently his niece, handed off in a felonious act that for some reason was never properly charged, since our tax records are like our deepest private property. Nonetheless, there it is. It happened. New York Times spent 2 years on this. This may be the biggest political finance fundraising scandal that we have ever seen.
But Matt's also right that it's a scandal for the media, because you have these media figures who were accepting donations to their pet organizations, and then sitting down with the candidate whose campaign donated to them.
But that's why
I mean it's
places that it didn't happen to. So it didn't happen to the Washington Post, or it didn't happen to the New York Times. Should
Well, by the way, let's see
the cleansing.
I was just going to say we don't know that there weren't versions of this,
right?
With the, I mean, that's why the joke about it.
Well, it's like the Jeffrey Epstein cover-up. You mean? It's like
Can we also
everybody was involved?
Take a moment to speculate what would have happened had she won the presidency? I mean, if you have a candidate who can't do an interview with someone that her campaign hasn't paid, how on earth would she have been the president of the United States? I mean, that's why my feeling on election night was kind of this relief. It wasn't excitement or any. It was just kind of like, well, we don't have to face 4 years of Harris, who had $1.5 billion and it ended up in 20 million in debt. Someone points out in one of the newsletters, I think it was Josh Barrow points out in his newsletter, you have a candidate who was running positive bio ads about how she was a prosecutor. She was combating the cartels. She knows, she's not afraid to call out the criminals like Donald Trump in her ads, or she's got a gun, she says. She's got a Glock. And then on the weekend before the election, she's asked about a high-profile criminal justice proposition in California, which would have actually repealed some of the pro-criminal defendant rights measures she had advocated for. And she says, I'm not going to talk about that now because it's right before the election. I'm not going to tell you what I think.
Well,
you're trying to be the president. Well, you have to tell us what you think.
But this disconnect was throughout almost every issue on her campaign. I was raised in a middle class family. Well, she's spending like a drunken sailor in her campaign. Like, she doesn't spend like a middle class person spends. And the same thing with everything about her self presentation and her very deep blue, very wealthy, very highly educated California base was clear to people. And she should have just leaned into it and said, "Here's what I've learned, even though I'm not like you." And she never learned.
I mean, the mind reels. Although one of our friends on Twitter X said, starting to miss Tim Walz a little bit because at least he provided some comic relief.
Just watch
I just watched the clips of him coming out on stage, and if you bring a little smile,
putting his putting his hands on his heart.
For those of us watching on YouTube, right, we can see the wave.
Go on Cameo and make money doing cameo videos of his best.
What did we live through? That I think that's the question that some Americans will be thinking about during the holiday season. Is what just happened beginning in July of 2024 through Election Day?
Well, argument against interest. I want to mention one thing because Christine mentioned a line, her most notorious line, and Sunday night, as I think I told you guys, we had our commentary roast. We roast a notable figure in America, or among American Jewry, whatever. This is something we've been doing for 14 years now. It's our major fundraiser. And this year, the challenge was set very high because we decided to roast Natan Sharansky, the man who spent 9 years in the Gulag for the crime of wanting to emigrate to Israel from the Soviet Union, and then got out, went to Israel, has been a sterling figure for the last 40 years. Many people think he is the greatest living Jewish hero. And so the joke of the roast was, how do you roast Natan Sharansky? And our columnist, Rabbi Meir Soloveichik, who is in commentary every month with his Jewish commentary column, and is one of the wittiest men alive, turned to me and said, of course I agreed to speak at this event, because when will a rabbi ever not to accept an invitation to speak? But in trying to think of how on earth I'm supposed to roast Natan Sharansky, I find myself silent. I can think of nothing to criticize him for in any way, shape, or form, and I didn't know what to say. So I dug back into time immemorial through the great moments in Jewish history, and I found the thing that we say when there is nothing else that we know how to say. I come from a middle-class family, he said.
It brought down the house too. Oh,
and it was a genuinely great moment. And that thing, like in 2 years, you're going to say, Kamala Harris, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
What the hell happened there? How did this happen? And
It
of course,
already feels like that, though,
what
doesn't it? It already feels that way.
totally feels that way. And I was going to say, argument against interest is that we obviously not fans of the Biden administration in almost any way. I mean, I honestly cannot think of a single thing that I think the Biden administration did, with the
He
exception of
improved our East Asian alliances.
okay,
That's the one. I
okay,
give him that.
okay,
That's the one thing.
okay, but not our ideological, strategic, tactical, pro-American, whatever cup of tea. And when in the beginning of January 2023, we began saying there is something wrong with the president. There is something off about the president, as he is not acting like a person who is fully in control of his faculties. You people would have easily, if they were paying attention, dismissed us as being partisan or, ideologically hostile. And so we were going with this cheap argument about his cognitive decline and all of that. And I feel like we could have saved the Democratic Party if they had listened to us. And I mean, not we weren't the only people saying it. I'm not saying that. Obviously, there was a
Their own
candidacy.
voters were telling them this in polls.
Yeah,
long before the debate.
66% of the American people said he's too old. You need to run somebody else, something like that. But I mean, we were sort of documenting it. People were documenting it, and the gaslighting was pretty amazing. I mean, Joe Scarborough went to see the president in April of 2024 and said he'd never seen anybody sharper. This was before he would crawl on his hands and knees to Mar-a-Lago to lick Donald Trump's boot, after Trump winning the election. Because when you sell your soul in this way, you can keep reselling it. But I mean, there's no way that was true, obviously, and he was just part of a gaslighting machine. And the ultimate result was that the world in which Joe Biden could have said at the beginning of 2023, I'm not running for re-election. I said I was going to be a bridge to the future. I have, saved us from Donald Trump. Let's have a process by which we determine who the next president of the United States should be within the Democratic Party, is an entirely different world. I don't know that Trump wouldn't have won. I don't know that they would have picked a candidate better than Harris. There's no way of knowing. The party was still enthralled to every liberal shibboleth that you could possibly imagine from that Harris was hit with. What candidate wouldn't have said the things about trans that she said, or the things about, or been bad on Israel and the Middle East and the war on terror the way she was, and all that. That's all I think.
But you know what? I think if Biden were sidelined earlier, or or before the fact of the campaign itself, it would have incentivized the idea that he's gone. Now we need someone really of the left here. We people are tired of the old establishment Democrats. Now this is our moment. He's moving aside, and it could have been disastrous. Yeah.
It could have been disastrous, and it could still be disastrous, because that's my bet on where the Democratic Party goes now is not that it's going to shift to the center. The example of Seth Moulton in Massachusetts is making it pretty clear that any candidate who sticks up his head and says, I think we went too far on some of these things, is going to get street action, not all that dissimilar from the MAGA street action against candidates who did not sufficiently toe the line on Trump personally. That is now going to be leftist, or for the Democrats, it will be leftist orthodoxy, that if you try to move away from, you are going to meet the kinds of difficulties that no political candidate running for re-election wants to face: a primary challenge, a controversy, people raising money against you, that kind of thing. That's why it's so important what's happening with Seth Moulton as a kind of
This is
example of what's going to go on in 25 and 26.
this is why our colleague at the American Enterprise Institute, Rui Teixeira, writes in his weekly Liberal Patriot newsletter that the key move for the Democrats now is to throw the interest groups under the bus. If you don't have a Democrat in 2028 who does that, they'll be in trouble. I mean, it may have been Patrick Ruffini who first pointed this out to me, but every successful president and presidential nominee runs against their own party. You can go back, I mean, really, you can go back to Reagan, who in 80 was running against the Nixon, Ford, Kissinger establishment, right? Clinton
Well,
was
Carter
came out of nowhere.
I'm coming in to clean up this, this
Right.
disgusting stable, and it wasn't just the Republicans that he was
Right. Yeah.
going to be cleaning up
After McGovern, right? You had a kind of this. Oh, he's a Southerner, and he's right. So Clinton then in 1992 running against the liberal mentality on welfare, on crime, on affirmative action. Bush in 2000, he's the compassionate conservative, unlike the Gingrich, tough guys who wanted to cut your benefits. Obama in 08, defeating Hillary Clinton because she was for the Iraq War. She was the Democratic establishment. And of course, Trump in 2016, who was not only against the Republican establishment, he was against the entire system of politics. So,
and Biden. The Biden run in 2019, 2020 was all these new Democrats that seem to be dominating the party. They're all crazy, and I'm sane. They're all listening to what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it helped with having the Sanders there, but nonetheless, I still think for the Democrats, if you're going to have a successful nominee in the future, it will be someone who, like Seth Moulton, will be able to challenge some of these groups and gain credibility. I mean, if you think about Harris, right, she never said that she differed with Biden or the Democratic Party on a single issue. And when she admitted it to Sonny Hostin on The View, that she couldn't think of a single thing that she would do differently than Joe Biden, whose approval rating in the exit poll was 40%. She doomed her candidacy.
But this is the question. Is there a Democratic Party, or are there only interest groups? Is the Democratic Party, as we understand, there is a formal structure called the Democratic Party. There are 50 state parties. There's a national party that raises money, all of that. But that party is a shell, and the shell is populated, dominated, and controlled by the interest groups. I don't know how you run against the interest groups, because there's no body that's not in one or another interest group that you can swim. There's a body of water to swim in.
No, but there are winnable. There are a ton of up for grabs votes in each election now, and that's this same rule applies.
You got to get to the election.
Right. No, but like the MAGA vote, this is the same problem with the Republican Party and MAGA influence. Like there are a lot of people who vote one way or the other and aren't pro MAGA and aren't pro, extreme left interest group. And this election showed they will shift. I mean, Asian American voters, Hispanic voters. I mean, you see younger voters, even they are registering as independents. They don't feel any loyalty. And so when you have a candidate who is a shell herself and just parrots what, her people tell her to say and doesn't seem authentic, yeah, they'll go, Trump. We'll go with Trump. But the Republicans have this same challenge in the next election cycle for president, which is they've got to put someone up who can persuade those people to stay. And that will be a challenge for them, especially on the culture war issues, because they came in the fold this time, but that doesn't mean they're there to stay.
Right. So we have two different bodies so the Republican Party was also a party of interest groups in a different way, though, because the Republican Party was a sort of, not an alliance, but sort of a cohesive sort of, if you like America and you think government is too big, you lean toward the Republicans. If patriotism, and then there are other secondary things, or gun ownership, pro-life, that kind of thing. But if you believed in free markets and you thought the government was too big and too intrusive, and that you believed in the military and you believed in the projection of America, you were a Republican. And the Democrats became increasingly the identity politics party. Whereas if you were a minority, you were a Republican. If you were a Democrat, if you had this, you were if you were engaged in the effort to expand rights, that just meant that you were a Democrat. And now the Republican Party doesn't have its interest groups in the same way because of this colossus figure that broke down the ideological discipline of the party.
But
and
so
Trump.
many of the voters who voted for Trump in the Cambridge University researchers just released this report, they were motivated, like something like 80% of them care about the deterioration of traditional American values.
Right.
And that's not what Trump stands for. I mean, he sort of says, make America great
Right.
again, but his whole thing was, a lot of his supporters are like, burn it all down and start from scratch. So there's
I don't know. Seth, our colleague now on vacation this week, Seth, wrote this piece, which I think other people have pointed out, but he was like, the secret of this election is that Biden ran in 2020 saying, I want to restore normality to America after this, incredibly disruptive, crazy period that was not only characterized by Trump's leadership, but also by COVID and all of that. And that who was the normie party in 2024? Was Trump the abnormal person, or was the party that said boys should be in girls' locker rooms and a 6'2" swimmer with a man's body should be winning all the awards in collegiate swimming in the United States because that's
Right.
only fair? They started seeming weird, right? The attack on Tim Walz's attack on JD Vance for being weird was the great boomerang of 2024, because JD Vance wasn't weird. I mean, I have problems with JD Vance, but he wasn't weird. Tim Walz was a little weird. Tim Walz is like saying he did things in Vietnam he didn't do. He did things in the military that he didn't do, and that he all that kind of stuff. And there's JD Vance, who was like, yeah, I served in the military. I have these views. I have a wife and 3 kids. Go to bed, kids. You're really cute. My, blah, blah, blah. It's like he didn't seem like the accusation.
MAGA, there's still, he had to shift a lot of his views to conform to the MAGA way of looking at the world.
I'm not defending.
There is an opportunity here, if you're a conservative, for an entire, several new generations of voters who care about a kind of new traditional values.
Yeah.
It's secular. Interestingly, it's not really about faith in the way that,
Right.
the sort of religious right was before. There is an opportunity. I don't have a huge amount of confidence that MAGA isn't going to squander that. That's my concern.
But it's like, what's happened is the Republicans can now say to Americans, do you want to just order off the regular menu? Like, you could just get the food as it comes with all the normal sides that you'd pick. You don't have to eat the vegan. We're not worried about your allergies or your this or your these you could just, you may not love it. It's not the best restaurant. It's not the best, but like, it's a big menu and there's stuff you'll recognize. There's food you can eat here.
I'm saying that
Not
the
Fruit Loops,
Democrat,
sorry, not Fruit
right,
Loops.
Right.
Fruit Loops,
Not for long, by the way. Right.
Yeah. But I do think that the Democratic Party's problem is that there is a gigantic vote in the middle, and this is, but how you get to the election where you can be the kind of person who can say, I hold the middle. I am the one that is more reflective of the kind of country that you want to live in. I don't know how they get there through the primary process, because I think the groups of the Democratic Party are the party, and they will control the money. They will control the street action. They will control the local delegate selections and through like that. And as I say, Seth Moulton, I think, is the pregnant example here, which is, does he make it through the primary process in 2026?
So to kind of just take it back from speculation and thinking about the here and now, we mentioned on the podcast the other day that the Democratic caucuses in Congress have essentially maintained the leadership that led them to defeat in 2024, so there's no change there. And then I'm kind of fascinated by this emerging race for chairman of the Democratic National Committee, because some of the names that are being tossed about are so old that it just speaks, I think, to an exhaustion in the party. You have, Martin O'Malley, the former Democratic governor of Maryland. He hasn't been governor in 12 years, maybe, or 10 years. He's thinking about running for chairman of the DNC. You have Rahm Emanuel, right? Former mayor of Chicago, ambassador to Japan, definitely somewhat former chief of staff to Barack Obama. He's thinking of running again. Somebody who's just been around for so long. I'd expect in a party that knows what it's doing and that has a sense of purpose and mission to have more younger voices emerge in races such as this, or in House leadership races. And we're not seeing that at all. I mean, who's really leading the resistance right now? It's Elizabeth Warren, saying
74 years old.
74 years old, saying that we have
Bernie
to pull
Sanders,
83 years old, right? So that's kind of, for me, in the here and now, a sign that the Democrats don't have their act together. But of course, the pendulum always swings back.
It will swing.
It's just a matter of how long it takes.
It's just a question of whether or not. I'm just saying, Seth's point was that Trump was the more normal of the two candidates. That's the amazing thing that the Democrats allowed to happen. This disruptive figure who gives the 2-hour rallies, Harris couldn't answer a question. She gets the nomination without having to run for it.
And Trump was also arguably more normal than Biden.
Right.
Not just Harris.
Well,
yeah.
I think you should depersonalize it, though. It's not really the person.
Right.
It's the views. And so when we talk about the most effective ad of the campaign, it's the Kamala is for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. So it's less about Trump, the person, and his normality. I mean, he's so larger than life and everything. But it's about the fact that Donald Trump is like, yeah, I'm not going to spend taxpayer money for gender reassignment for illegal immigrants in prison. I mean, that's a kind of gimme, you would think, in politics. But Harris never had an answer for it. And when you look at some of the surveys about what the Democratic Party stands for, John Byrne Murdoch, who's at the Financial Times, is a data journalist who's very sharp. He points out that over time, the number of people who say that the Democrats stand for the working person has collapsed, whereas the people who say that Democrats stand for the rights of cultural minorities has increased. And this has spiked while the Democrats are now the party of people with college degrees and higher and who do pretty well. So that's the real shift, is that the Republican Party of Trump is the party of basic neo-traditional America. And as Christine says, it's not necessarily even religious America, though there's a heavily religious component. It's just that, we don't think that you should defund the police. We don't think that you should reorganize society on this gender ideology that says there's no such thing as biological sex, right? We don't think that you should force feed students in K through 12 and in higher education this just Marxist mumbo jumbo. That's kind of where the party is, and it's helped the party in the age of Trump.
Well, right. And that was what the media. That's where the media should have helped Harris by highlighting some of the way that message was landing. That Madison Square Garden rally, the only thing that anyone talked about afterwards in the mainstream media was obviously the joke about Puerto Rico. But Trump at that rally said, "We will get men out of women's sports. We will make sure that." That was one of his big applause lines that night. Nobody reported on that, but voters heard that. His voters heard that, and the normie voters definitely heard that message.
But I think that all of this taken together, goes to maybe something much, much simpler than what is it about trans or this or that. Democrats and liberals started to argue, I think, from 2015 onward, things that when you reflected on them for more than 2 minutes were crazy. Let's have fewer cops. is crazy. Let's have fewer cops because cops are mean to black people. And every day, black people are getting assassinated by the police. And then our friend, publishing in Commentary and elsewhere, Wilfred Riley, tallied up the number of black people shot by cops in 2018 or something like that across the United States, and it was 9 people. And so people kind of know that because I think they figure, if a cop is shooting an unarmed civilian every single day in the country, like there would be a news story about it every single day. And you would and so they're like, wait, that doesn't pass the smell test. Closing schools and having people sit 6 feet apart when the word is that the virus, that you have no evidence that the 6 feet is the 6 feet. And I know that was under Trump, but somehow we knew that Trump didn't really believe in it, but he was just pushing it. That doesn't sound right. And then you keep going to that doesn't sound. Suddenly you have this architecture, which is these people are building a crazy house I don't want to live in. I want to live in a rational, like, girls are girls and boys are boys. Stop telling me that that's not true.
There's another part of it, which is that it's very easy to buy into crazy ideas when you don't have much else to worry about, which is why wealthy liberals still buy into these ideas, right? But if you're in the rest of the country and you have experienced the American economy over the years, those intervening years, you're off the crazy stuff. You don't have time to buy into the crazy anymore. The administration needs to respond to your problems now because you have problems and you have issues. So these are.
I think that's
it's a total luxury to buy into these crazy.
It would be, and I think this is where maybe I do agree with Christine, and it's that there's a danger, I think, for the Republicans in not recognizing that the main reason they won this election was the inflation and the economy, and the cultural stuff is part of it for sure, but Trump's main and the foreign policy stuff is part of it too, right? But Trump's main mission here is to get the economy to a place where people feel that their life fortunes are improving and that you have rising incomes with stable prices. And it was the lack of that under Biden and the Biden administration's refusal to admit it. I mean, up to the day of the election, the Biden folks and the Harris folks were saying the economy is great. It's the best economy in the world. We're doing so much better than Europe. Think about that for a second. How the heck does a person living in Michigan know what the economy in Europe is like? Right? It's like, they don't work in Europe. There's no way for them to compare other than to have some economists tell them, well, according to this chart, our economy is much better than Europe. Voters are thinking about what's happening to them, not what's happening to them vis-a-vis some third party. So that I believe drove the election more than anything else. And it would be a mistake for Trump and MAGA to say, well, now that we have this, we can embark on our goal of completely seizing the institutions, tearing them apart, deconstructing the administrative state. Okay, that's one of your goals. But if you do that instead of addressing the economy, then you're going to run into trouble in 2 years.
And of course, the big question here, because I think we can all agree that Trump has to perform for the Republican Party to solidify the gains of this election. Like people have to think that this presidency was a successful presidency, which they did not believe in November of 2020 when they voted him out. I think largely because of COVID, obviously, but and that's an irreproducible crisis. Let's hope. But they're going to have to feel that he improved things materially, and therefore the Republican message or the party that he took over or whatever has answers that the Democratic Party demonstrated it did not. And, it's an open question about whether the economic agenda of the Trump administration can get anywhere near performing that way. And I say it's an open question because if their signature economic policy is going to be tariffs, even if the tariffs have positive consequences in some fashion or other in certain elements of, making countries lower, do stuff so that they don't trigger the tariffs, or more jobs, more plants are located in the United States than in China or in India aggregate over time. Tariffs are inflationary. They are just inflationary as a matter of fact. They raise the price of goods, and the price of goods is then passed on to voters. And he has a catch 22 because he loves them because they're fantastic. It means essentially that you think you're taxing essentially people in China, so you don't have to raise taxes in the United States to fund the government and do the things that you want. But the way the system of our economy works is that in the end, a good is a good, and it's paid for by the person who buys it, or he won't buy it, in which case there is no economic growth. Or if he buys it and it costs 35 cents more than it would otherwise because the tariff has raised the price of it, you get inflation. So either you get low growth or you get inflation, or you get a combination of the two. And so it's very unclear that
What
Trump's
if the tariffs end up being like the wall of 2016?
Well, I think
he built some wall.
That is Trump's escape, right? Yeah. That he put some tariffs on, but of course he said he wants to do a tariff, right? That's his right, which is, I guess, like the wall. But that's why I say the jury is out on Matt's absolutely right. Occam's razor reason for this election going the way it went is that the inflation killed the Biden administration off, and that making sure that it doesn't come back or that it keeps going down, and that economic growth, that people see measurable increases in the wages, or those wage increases aren't eaten away by inflation, is his sole economic challenge. Now he's got a huge one coming because the tax cuts of 2017 expire at the end of 2025, and the entire tax code is going to have to be written again because of the expiration of the tax cuts. And that's also going to be something no one's even talked about. That is like a massive, mammoth thing to have the entirety of the structure of the tax code.
We can fix that on Monday.
Okay, good. Yes.
We'll
deal
with the tax code on Monday.
Okay, we're going to fix. Yeah.
We didn't talk about this, so I'm springing this on John, so you can cut this out if it's not. But we were talking about a recommend, and since we talked about the roast, can I make a very meta recommend, which is there was a delightful young man who came to our roast, and he took it upon himself, because he's a podcast listener, to create an X account for our recommendations so that people could find them. And wait, I have it here. And they made this graphic of us for those of you.
Yeah, so if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the graphic. Yes.
And it's just, he performed this really lovely podcast public service, and I regret that I do not recall his exact name, so I apologize for that.
We'll tell you it on Monday.
We'll find out his name. But I feel like we should recommend the recommendation X feed, because it's a great place to find everything we recommend on the daily. And
so that is right. It's at Commentary Recommends on X, and he puts out. We don't have one today, so maybe I should just throw one in.
Go for it.
Off the top of my head.
On his toes.
I'm worried that I'm Bidening out, and that I mentioned this earlier this week. So if I did, I apologize. But I don't think we've done a recommends this week, so I may have talked about it somewhere else. There's a book by the actor Tim Matheson. Tim Matheson, best known as Otter in National Lampoon's Animal House. Eric Stratton. The book is called Damn Glad to Meet You, which is, of course, Otter's signature line in Animal House. And it is a memoir. It is a pretty stunning portrait of a guy from a horrible family, kid, it's two drunken parents, but he, at the age of 9 or 10, is seized with the idea that he wants to be an actor, and he lives in Los Angeles, and he starts going on auditions, and he starts getting cast and stuff, and it's about a person who almost makes it. At every stage of his career, he almost makes the leap into the A level, but he never quite does. And he's perfectly aware that he never quite does. And first it's television, and then it's movies, because he has this incandescent, like star-making performance that he can't really capitalize on, and he makes bad choices, and he has a messy personal life. And it's about somebody who gets a 6 or 7 decade career, and has this one sort of iconic performance, but is basically a struggling journeyman in many ways for the entirety of his life. And the great story in the book is about how he goes into the Marine Reserve, because he is in the late 60s, and he is going to be drafted. So he goes into the Marine Reserve, and his key thing that he realizes he has to do is make sure that nobody knows that he is on TV shows. Because if his fellow recruits and if his drill sergeants know that he is some kind of prissy Hollywood boy who, thinks he's so high and mighty that he gets to be on TV, his life will not be worth a plug nickel. And so he hides it, and he hides it, and he hides the fact. But he had just been in a movie called Yours, Mine, and Ours, which is a movie about a two couple blended family, sort of like the Brady Bunch, only have 12 children. Henry Fonda is the father, and Lucille Ball is the mother. And there was going to be this moment where Lucille Ball did a number with all 12 kids on the Ed Sullivan Show, and Tim Matheson cannot go because he is in basic training. And so he says, I can't go. And they're like, okay. And then Lucille Ball calls Bob Hope, and Bob Hope calls the Marine Corps commandant and says, can you get this kid out so she can go do this show with Lucille Ball for 3 days in New York? And it happens. And he spends months in terror. Now, they're all in basic training, so they're not watching the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday night like everybody else in America, but he spends months terrified that they're going to find out, because he got, not only was he on TV, but like he got leave to go be on TV in this number. And then they do find out through some different modality, and they do in fact beat the absolute crap out of him. And but it's an interesting story, because he says, I was anti-war, but I wanted to serve my country, and I never really figured out where I fit on the ideological spectrum. The book's called Damn Glad to Meet You. It's by Tim Matheson, and it's a story of a very singular American career. I do have a particular fascination for these kind of like second rank showbiz memoirs, so I'm letting you know that if you haven't figured that out already, so that maybe much of the detail in it will be incredible.
I love how tolerant we are of our weird literary fetishes, because you guys are so tolerant of my dystopian Japanese fiction. We like the memoirs.
Yeah, the science fiction. I did download the Book of Skulls, Matt.
Very good.
Robert Silver, which you recommended earlier this week.
That book. Yeah.
So and I'm going to read it on a train today. Anyway, we're not going to do recommends, but because of Christine's Hail Mary play to recommend the Twitter feed at Commentary Recommends, there will be something for that lovely gentleman to put up today, and we will cite his name on Monday and thank him again
when we fix the tax code.
Right, we're fixing the tax code on Monday.
And
until then, everybody write down one good idea. So until then, for Abe, Christine, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.